So yeah, this ice cream man was a kind of fellow. What he did was, he hooked it up. He gave me a Dixie cup to go with my waffle cone, which I proceeded to put inside my own bowl. But he gave me a heads up. He's like, yeah, this waffle cone is not gonna work. So I'm pretty excited because, and this is actually the root topic of the video today, because this is an announcement, and I hereby announce that hopefully by Tuesday I will take delivery of a device called a retro, well, it's called a Ultra HDMI. And you see, the Ultra HDMI is a peripheral for the Nintendo 64, which works on pretty much, from what I understand, every model of Nintendo 64. Because I actually did a video some weeks ago, months ago actually, maybe like March, February, where I took apart one of my Nintendo 64s. Because I got two of them. I got two. And I even bought a expansion pack for the second one. But, you know, when I worked at Best Buy, you'd come across the e-waste recycling heap. And that's how I get an N64. So there's this website, Retro Game Repair Shop. Now, they sell the product to people, but they also offer the service to perform the installation. And what you see here is, you know, you can actually go to the people who make the product, but they do not sell it directly to people. They sell it to people who, you know, perform installation, because they don't want to be bothered by people who have trouble installing this. They're not there to give you a soldering tutorial. So luckily these guys are willing to sell it, and they say, important, this mod requires Nintendo 64 disassembly chassis modification if not using a no-cut mod, as well as micro soldering, which I would not call it micro soldering. I think that is hyperbolic language. But jokes aside, this micro soldering is the reason I'm confident I can do the job, because like a year or so ago, I modified an NVIDIA Tesla graphics card, also known as an NVIDIA K2. And let's make sure I find the right video. Yeah, here we are. It should be in this neighborhood. I'm finding the video. So I have an HP rack-mounted server in my basement, and well, for demonstration purposes, this is the graphics cards, or this is my desktop computer as I have it right now. Yeah, there we go. Let's resize that. So on the top is an NVIDIA GTX 2060. And on the bottom is an NVIDIA, the top is an RTX 2060 with 6 gigs of video RAM, and on the bottom is a GTX 1070 with 8 gigs. Now, the problem is the top one is occupying an X16 lane PCI Express slot. The bottom one is only running in X8 mode, which is not an issue. As it turns out, you're unlikely to use that much of the bandwidth, even though graphics cards are an X16 type. That's the type of, you know, board or connector you have. It's unlikely you're gonna have an issue with that. So anyway, that's what's in my desktop, or that's what was in my current desktop before I removed the bottom guy. And you can even see markings that say PCIe. And That's PCI Express slot number 4. And when you look at the user manual for any motherboard, it'll tell you like what cards you can put into each slot. So essentially, if you put a high performance PCI card into one slot, then you might only be able to put a lower performance card into the next slot, and stuff of that nature. But let's fast forward to my server, assuming I took video of my server. I must have taken video. Oh yeah, I took a video, alright. And for reference, this is what the 1070 looks like from the back. Takes up 2 slots. Well, how did I get off topic here? I went off topic here. Whoops. Well, good thing nobody tuned in yet. But there is, I'm pretty sure there's a reason I went off topic here. I'm pretty sure, yeah, I mean, not very sure, but somewhat sure that there is a perfectly good reason for me to go off topic. Aha, there we are. We are getting warmer. That is the top of my HP rack-mounted server. Oh wait, I'm not showing video, am I? Okay, so actually, yes, now I remember. Okay, so let's do this from the top because I can edit this video at any time because nobody has tuned in yet. Alright. According to delivery information, I will be taking delivery of this device this Tuesday. I ordered it late last week or early last week, it's like middle of last week. It's called an Ultra HDMI, and it is a device that you can install into pretty much any version of the Nintendo 64. And it adds HDMI ports to it. And this version also has the analog RGB output on it, which is the more traditional mod for the N64. What do I mean by that? Well, there are components you can buy for an N64, such as this guy right here. And you basically, this is a basic amplifier, and you get like actually a web page on compatibility. In fact, great website, retrorgb.com. And you see, years ago, a friend of mine at my old job was getting on about buying these weird video cables called Scott cables for his Super Nintendo, so that he could play them with the best possible picture. And I think he would use a Scott cable to HDMI adapter, something like this, where it would go from the Scott cable to component cable, and there's like an HDMI device over here that does the same thing. Basically, somewhere here there's a dongle that has an, oh, that's interesting. I'm gonna have to look into this later. It's a little expensive though. I'm probably not gonna buy it. This is for the original Xbox, and I don't think I'm gonna get it because it looks like it only works on an actual mod chip, or with a mod. Oh, it's, wait, mod chip is included. Okay, I'm gonna have to look into that later. So anyway, there's a dongle, and it goes from a SCART connection to HDMI, and you could use it on a Super Nintendo out of the box, basically, with no extra work. Alternatively, you could buy a Sony CRT, a professional grade Sony Trinitron CRT, and use the leftmost cable to go from SCART to RGB. And if you ever see like a CRT in a retail store, sometimes they use them for surveillance cameras in many places, banks, retail stores, etc. It's probably using something like that. or sometimes. Depends. So, this picture will be relevant in just a moment, but there's a caveat. So, Super Nintendo has RGB support built in. N64, by using the modification in the picture I showed a moment ago, which I've already misplaced. Oh yeah, this is the dongle, by the way. So if you do the RGB mod to an N64 and you plug this in, you can convert it to HDMI. So you don't need to buy the Ultra HDMI. You can do the cheaper mod, and then, you know, use that instead of a SCART cable. So that's cool. But the problem with the cheaper mod is there's different versions of it depending on the version of the N64 you have. Hence the compatibility, and they tell you, oh, does your N64 have this chip or that chip? DIY do-it-yourself RGB amplifier, and it tells you like all of the stuff you need. You gotta build one of these basically, or you gotta attach resistors to it. It's not too difficult, but once again, you're gonna have to source the correct resistors and wire it up accordingly. And I'm just a little more comfortable with a pre-rolled solution. Here we are again, and this actually illustrates excellently what I'm talking about. So on the N64 motherboard, if you open it up, that's the cartridge connector. There's 3 pins that are wired up to one of the chips on that motherboard, and coming out of that chip, whether it be the CPU or the graphics chip, the GPU, literally 3 of the legs on that microchip output are G and B. And with that known, you could pretty much run these 3 wires straight to the back of the N64 to get an unamplified RGB signal. But of course that is not good enough. So you have an amplifier, or you build an amplifier, and that makes a difference. But then you need those stupid cables, and that can be annoying. But it's still, you know, it's an option. And they mentioned RGB cables, so I think this is like the best one. It works on all N64s. Unmodded consoles will work in composite HDMI mode, but then if you do the RGB, it'll do RGB to HDMI mode, which means you'll either get better than nothing, and if you have the RGB mod, you'll get better than the upscale. Because I have an upscaler right now hooked up to my N64. It's a fine upscaler for a composite upscaler, but you're still using just a plain composite video signal, which my wire is just that. That's an composite video signal, whereas RGB has 3 separate lines for, you know, red, green, and blue respectively. So you get a better signal, and there is a picture here to kind of give you an idea of what it might look like. If I could just find it. Huh, looks like I lost it. Oh well, we'll show you right here. This. Left side represents a composite video signal, right side represents an RGB video signal. Now, in general, I would argue this is already better. But there is a caveat. Older TV signals, and you'll notice this if you hook an N64 up to an adapter and input it to your computer, especially an adapter that does not remove scan lines automatically, you will see these horizontal lines called scan lines. Like anything moving quickly on the screen will literally have like little horizontal lines on the edge. And you could process them in post-processing, but there's some caveats. There's devices that will do it automatically, but the devices that do it automatically, you're cutting the resolution in half in order to get rid of scan lines. And so ideally you want to output a clean signal that has no scan lines. Now the problem is that the N64 was designed under the assumption that there would always be scan lines, so they actually added some blurring effects to it to, like, you know, deal with the situation, in fact to take advantage. And some people will literally buy a box called a OSSC, Open Scanline Converter, OSCC, something like that, Open Scanline Converter, and it's like a box, like $200 or something like that. And you go from having like a fresh RGB signal on a modified console, or on a console that has the best cables you could hook up to it. Because once again, you don't need to modify a Super Nintendo, you just need special cables to get the best signal out of a Super Nintendo. but on an N64 you gotta modify it, and have special cables up until somewhat recently. But, and some people like the scan lines. Now, if you're arguing that, oh, I like the sound of a record player because of the scratching sound of the music between tracks, well, it's not really a good reason in my opinion. I mean, to each their own. There are other good reasons to prefer record players, but scan lines, similar vein. Some people would say they prefer scan lines. Okay, fine, it's subjective, but there are a few examples. So this is like a Sonic game with scan lines. Now it's a little blurrier, but they designed the game to have scan lines. That was the expectation, and those horizontal lines, every like about 30 times a second or 60 times a second, they do this. And it does that like to change, instead of changing the whole frame, it alternates the lines in order to advance new frames to animate or to do animation. Well, without the scan lines, this is what the waterfall in Sonic looks like. So what happened was the developers of this Sonic game knew that, you know, they couldn't not have scan lines. So they took advantage of it to make this lovely waterfall effect. And then, you know, when it's animated, it looks pretty nice. It's like a sort of transparency effect. In fact, the beauty of this effect is that, you know, there is no alpha blending. There is no transparency on this signal here. But in this part, it sort of looks like it is transparent. It looks like you have a waterfall that is like half opaque in front of Tails. But in reality, that's not the case. But what's happening is the scan lines alternating, the horizontal scan lines alternating vertically mixes with this vertical line to create this effect. So there's that. Then you could see this column over here. It almost looks like shading. But over here, some would argue it looks like crap. Now, I would say some of this looks better, but I can respect what people mean. And there are games where like they'll paint a human face in a cartoonish way, and when you take away the scan lines, it looks worse. But I'm willing to deal with that. I'd rather have a clean video signal. I could always take off my glasses. I look handsomer anyway, and then everything gets blurry. But this is like one of the best examples I saw of why you might want scan lines. And it's not a bad argument. Same thing here. Apparently there's a series of tweets where people are arguing about this, and they got valid points here. It's funny. It's all personal preference, but yeah, the composite picture sort of looks better. In my opinion, I think there are ways to make the best of it. But in the case of N64, I'll take the cleaner, less blurry video signal. I'll especially take the video signal that doesn't have scan lines, because if anything, you're better off adding scan lines after the fact. Because if you have a cleaner signal, you got options. You know, we can work on the programming. People can work on developing new ways to do it in software. Even the open scanline converter has a slight fraction of a second delay in doing what it does. It's not significant, but it is worth noting. So enter the N64 RGB mod. I ordered this last week. It's gonna come. Unlike the other examples I showed you where, you know, I have to have like one of these 3 microchip looking thingamajigs. And the beauty of this is like sometimes you need to have this and something else to do a certain model. But if you have an older N64, you'll only need the little guy on the back left corner. And the little one is very easy to do. And between this and that RGB dongle called the RAD2X, you pretty much have everything you need. But the retro RGB takes it to another level. So essentially you're soldering the ribbon cable to the motherboard using a technique called drag soldering. Luckily, I have the soldering iron that can handle it. They recommend a Hakko, H-A-K-K-O, Hakko soldering iron. They're not terribly cheap, but I understand why they're recommending them. And let's see, FX888D. How much is a Hakko? Like 140 bucks. So I paid about that much for whatever I bought anyway. So yeah, I'm in pretty good shape. I got a knockoff Hakko that's very similar. And I can control the temperatures very precisely. It's got like these ceramic like rods that go inside that just heat very precisely. So anyway, you get the right soldering iron. You get a chisel file, whatever they call it. And you do the soldering. You bend the ribbon at the right angle. So far, so good. Then you take apart your Nintendo. Whoops. My mistake. Whoopsie daisy. I pressed the page up button on the wrong screen. So I did this on one of my N64s. It wasn't too daunting, so I'm not terribly worried. Now, this is the interesting part. With the other version, you need special cables or a special dongle to convert it to HDMI after you install the RGB mod and after you wire up the internals. In the most basic version, you're just literally running 3 wires from a chip straight to the back and then using an amplifier either externally or you're putting an amplifier somewhere right near the connector on the inside. This one has all of that, of course, on the board. All of that is here and here all together. So what you see is what you get, and it gives you everything you need. And that board has an HDMI port on it, and you can see you got to cut out an HDMI port, and they demonstrate using a hobby knife or an X-Acto knife. They slice out the rough position. Then once you have this rough cut, you can use a rotary tool, like a Dremel rotary tool, and then you file it down. And you can see the guy here is filing it down. Then I think they're shaving away a little excess plastic to help make it fit better. I'm not really sure what they're doing there, or maybe it's just to refine the cut. And then from there, you can they show you how to install it, how you just glide right across the pins. I guess the idea is you have it on long enough to heat up the soldering lead, but not so long to melt the mylar. I don't even know if the mylar would melt. You attach some connections to these capacitors, what look like capacitors to me. So it's pretty much like installing a mod chip, but for the purposes of video. And then it tells you what these connectors do. I'm going to read this in greater detail on my own time, but they're telling you scrape off the green soldering mask. So the solder mask is the green stuff. They basically paint the board in solder mask. So you scrape off the mask, then you put some liquid flux or gel type flux onto it. They tell you, oh, by the way, if you have a different version of the N64, look for this connection. So you got to be wary. Oh, you got to be aware of different versions. Then they tell you where the connections are on the actual RGB device. The HDMI device has what they call an FPGA chip on it, Field Programmable Gate Array. It's basically a chip that could be rearranged to do the job of different types of chips. So, it can do a variety of things. Instead of you telling a company, I need a custom microchip created, you take a FPGA and you can use software to kind of rearrange its inner workings in a manner of speak. And there's a way to hook up a wire to this chip so that your controller can issue an in-game reset command. You can press Z, R, A, B and start at the same time instead of pressing the reset button. Also, there is a hidden menu inside of this device that you can call up from the controller using another key, combination of keys on your remote, and that will allow you to change the resolution or the output modes, different settings. I think you could actually turn on the blur filter if you prefer to have a blurrier image that looks more genuine, or if you want to have a crisp image, you could have that. But once again, maybe the image is so crisp that you end up with something like this and you don't like it. well, you know, they provide you with some functionality to help cope with that. There's a foam pad to prevent it from rattling around, and it's probably a pretty tough adhesive. I don't know what this is. I guess it's, you're connecting the ribbon cable or something like that. Okay, so basically I have to be careful not to break it when I disconnect it. It tells you about the self-test feature using the Z button, D-pad, etc. I guess they tell you to attach a sticker to the bottom of the N64, which tells you what key combinations. Place the exterior label on one of the recesses at the bottom. Contains 2-letter installer code that lets the customer know you did the install. And in this example, it's marked 0AB. AB is the installer code. I don't know what that means, but okay. I guess that's like if a specific company performed the installation, you know who to blame. It tells you like if there's a wiring problem, it's got some LED on it that will tell you different things. Normal operation, no HDMI cable is plugged in. Normal operation, HDMI sync plugged in. Transmitter is on. You know, once again, if they're using fancy language. Something about clock generators. CPU started but failed initialization. So it's got an actual CPU in there to do the upscaling. N64 doesn't turn on, no LED on the console. N64 turns on but no analog video output. RCP Flex may have adjacent pin shorts, so maybe you shorted out something, you didn't connect it right. You connected 2 pins together at the same time. No audio over HDMI. It tells you what to do, to check the settings, to check if to confirm that it thinks you're outputting to HDMI, because if it thinks you're using a DVI monitor, then it's not going to output audio through the HDMI output. And different things like that. Remove any game cartridge, activate hotkey. How do you do that? Okay, well, whatever. So you get the idea. And then you get some more detail on the you know, circuit diagram here, etc, etc. Bottom line is we'll get a crisper picture on the N64 without having to buy weird SCART cables, which I really don't want to buy, and without using an external dongle. And so I will simply have an HDMI port on my N64. Speaking of which, it will not be an HDMI port, it'll be a mini HDMI port. So yeah, I will have to purchase this, but I'm fine with that. I'm not going to go crazy. Maybe I'll buy a couple of extra cables just so that I have them. In fact, I got to order that today before I forget. I forgot to order this when I bought the actual device. And that is basically the gist of that. So in conclusion, I'm looking forward to Wednesday, because assuming I take delivery of this product on Tuesday, I'll be able to install it on Wednesday. Maybe, you know, I plan to do it during a live stream. I'll do the soldering work right here, and then we'll immediately test it out on the internet, live from New York. It'll be Wednesday Night Live. And so yeah, that's basically the gist of it. Thank you for not tuning in to my live stream. Joking. But that's interesting. My sound just got really loud. Sound check. So yeah, I'm testing my audio. Test. That's weird. My audio got really, I sort of read. So anyway, I'm getting distracted here. Thank you for tuning in to the recording if you've done this. If not, that's okay. C'est la vie, as Captain Kirk said at the end of Star Trek Generations. But I will hopefully on Tuesday night have the device in my hand, and I'll have all of the tools in my other hand. And if that is the case, I will go ahead and post a advertisement and an announcement in multiple places. I'll even tweet it out. Maybe I'll tweet. I don't know, I'm not really comfortable on Twitter, but I'll announce it, and then that'll give people enough time in advance to choose to tune in if they wish to tune in. So with that, yeah, I'm really looking forward to this because I want to play some N64 games during live streams, but I want the best picture, and it is my opinion that you can't emulate all. I mean, it's not an opinion, it's a fact. You cannot emulate every Nintendo 64 game. There are some N64 games that simply do not emulate well. So as a result, we have the technology. Well, there's no better way to play N64 games without N64 games that do emulate well. Mario 64 performs well. Mario 64 works so well that it worked on my first generation on my Pentium 1 at 120 megahertz back in 1997. So, you know, I mean, there was that, but then Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, parts of the menu don't even work. Certain levels don't work. GoldenEye, I remember that being a bit tricky to play. Other games will play very smoothly, but the audio will skip. Other games will have good audio, but the game will have like choppy frame rates. So there's always a compromise emulating most N64 games except for the early launch titles. Banjo-Kazooie worked pretty good actually. But you get the idea. So having genuine N64 hardware is the way to do it. Now the only thing cooler would be if there was a way to use like a microcontroller, an Arduino, it's like a little circuit board that you could use for different purposes, to maybe make it possible to remotely operate an N64 when you're away from home. That would be bloody cool. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. I'm more of the, I'm not gonna get greedy. I'll be happy to just have an HDMI port on my N64 with the option to use an RGB output if I ever wish to. And the cool thing is, if you use the RGB output on a Sony Trinitron Professional CRT, you will get the best possible Nintendo 64 visual experience that you can get. However, once again, I find that very limiting, and so I'm just super pleased that I will have a built-in HDMI port on my N64 when this is said and done. With that, I truly will end this video now. Please like and subscribe, and please tune in on Wednesday, assuming that I actually get to do this on Wednesday. Good evening.